What's up everyone, this is Devi aka Deviant Dreamers, and I'm back with the next video in our Gwent Tips and Tricks series. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the Scoia'tael faction in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
Wouldn't mind a few rounds of cards.
Now I know it's been a little while since I've made one of these videos. I do sincerely apologize for that. Life did get chaotic and it did get in the way, but we are back, we are energized, and we are ready to tackle the next faction. As always, if this video ends up helping you in any way, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and do let us know below if you have any tips or suggestions that you also utilize when playing with the Scoia'tael faction. Now, in my personal opinion, I consider the Scoia'tael faction probably the weakest faction in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. But hopefully with the tips and tricks we provide, you'll be able to turn it into something stronger than you've ever imagined. So let's get started with looking at this particular faction. First, let's talk about the Scoia'tael's faction ability. With the Scoia'tael's faction ability, the player can choose who they would like to start in round 1, either themselves or their opponent. Now, if your opponent is also playing with the Scoia'tael faction, then it comes down ultimately to a coin flip decision. For the most part, I would recommend going second. Not only does choosing to play second give you more opportunity in terms of playing reactively against your opponent, but it can also provide an advantage when playing against an opponent who uses a fair number of spy and decoy cards. Of course, the reasoning behind this is that if you end up going second, there's inherently less of an opportunity for your opponent to use these strategies against you. And of course, more often than not, going second will allow you to build a card advantage against your opponent heading into round 2. Now let's talk about the leader abilities of the Scoia'tael faction. These 5 Francesca Findabair cards will allow you to draw an extra card at the beginning of the battle, move Agile units to whichever row maximizes their strength, play a Biting Frost card from your deck instantly, destroy your enemy's strongest units in the close combat row if they add up to 10 or more points, and double the strength of your ranged row units. Now, based solely on these leader abilities, I would consider the Scoia'tael faction to be particularly strong against the monster faction. The ability to play a Biting Frost card instantly from your deck could be quite powerful against the monster faction. That being said, however, it could also hurt your gameplay as well. Although a lot of the units in the Scoia'tael faction are Agile units, which we will address later in this video, a fair number of them are also close combat units, so use that Biting Frost very sparingly. When I play with the Scoia'tael faction, I tend to use either the leader ability that doubles the strength of my ranged row, or the leader ability wherein I can move my Agile units to whichever row maximizes their strength. This could be particularly powerful against an opponent who utilizes their weather cards in an attempt to bring your score down, and if you don't have any clear weather cards in your deck. Now let's talk a little bit about the composition of the Scoia'tael faction. Unique to this faction is the concept of Agile cards. Now, Agile cards can be placed in either the close combat row or the ranged row. But of course, once you play them in either row, you cannot change their position unless you use the leader ability I just described. Now, if you were to revive this card with a medic or something along those lines, do note that they will randomly summon your card to either the close combat or range row. You do not get to select again. One of the strengths of an Agile card is its ability to try and counter any weather-based approaches that your opponent might make. So for example, if your opponent wants to play a Biting Frost card to try and diminish the value of your close combat units, you can start playing these Agile cards in your ranged row as a counter, or vice versa. The Scoia'tael faction also has a fair number of cards with the Muster ability. Now, while I wouldn't consider it necessarily a specialty of this deck, it is important to note that a lot of these muster cards are also in the ranged row versus just the close combat row. So that kind of helps to build a little bit of a responsive playstyle in that you have more options available to you. Now let's talk about some of the difficulties you might encounter with the Scoia'tael deck. A lot of these cards, unfortunately, are very far and few high point value cards. A lot of them tend to be on the lower end of things. Because of this, you might find yourself relying on cards like Commander's Horn to try and boost those values up a bit more. Now, of course, the caution with that is trying to avoid your cards getting scorched at any possible moment. If you can hold off on playing cards like that until the very end of a round to try and kind of usurp the power balance there, that would be the smartest approach. While it's not unique to the Scoia'tael faction, there are a fair number of medic cards in this deck as well. Although I will say one disadvantage to these medic cards is that they are, again, very low point values. So while it might benefit you to have some medics occasionally, these Havocar healers, you do have to keep in mind that you are occupying one of the 22 slots in your deck with essentially a 0 point value card. And in a deck with no natural spies other than a neutral hero, which is our mysterious elf, which of course you can't resurrect, it's not very advantageous to have a lot of these medic cards. Now, in terms of the most powerful cards in this deck, I would definitely consider Isengrim to be one of the most powerful. A 10-point hero, gives a morale boost in the close combat row as well. And I would consider another particularly powerful card in the Scoia'tael deck to be Shuru, which of course is an 8-point siege unit and is able to use a Scorch ability to destroy your enemy's strongest siege combat units if the combined strength of those siege combat units equals 10 or more points. Now, in terms of what you might be able to utilize, different strategies and different cards to win against the Scoia'tael faction, I would recommend building a deck that has ample usage of Weather and Scorch cards. This way you might be able to address a whole row of units through Biting Frost, through Impenetrable Fog, but also you can wipe out larger chunks or groups of units at one time with that muster ability, such as the Havocar Smugglers. Now, while the medic cards in the Scoia'tael deck may not be particularly strong, it is important to note that they can draw out a long round 2 or a long round 3 just by using a lot of medic cards in their deck. All things considered, I do believe that the Scoia'tael faction is the weakest faction in Gwent and the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, so I definitely don't think you should encounter many challenges or many players who play exceptionally well with them. That being said, however, if you have any suggestions or questions or tips, anything that you might be able to offer us, let us know below. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Next time, we'll be taking a closer look at the Monster faction, one of my personal favorites in Gwent Online. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and I hope to see you then!